Good evening and welcome to the rest of the news. Well, there's so much going on, we almost don't know where to start. But our special guest this evening is retired State Representative Ed Holloway. We appreciate you helping us out today. We went to a rally on the 24th downtown. Mayor Greg Fischer and U.S. Representative Yarmuth were the speakers, and they were promoting bringing in more refugees,
right?
Especially Syrian refugees. Here's the flyer that came out from MoveOn.org. It's a tremendous surprise to me that they are trying to bring in more and more Muslim refugees, especially when it's the Christians that are being tortured over there. And they don't seem to let any of them in at all.
You know, this is a problem that we're facing, and in Jefferson County particularly, we have 15% of our population are immigrants, 4%. And this is a major issue when you look at more people coming in Kentucky with the basis of not only the mayor, but the governor and the others that are pushing for this.
Yeah.
And at the same time, with Kentucky, with the financial problems that we have already, we're forced to take care of these refugees, supplying with housing, with food, with medical, and all of those things that some portions of are covered by the federal government, but there's a limit to how long they will do that. So we're stuck with all of those things, and it has nothing to do with compassion in the sense that because there's no screening going on, we've been able to, the slow process before, to be able to determine who is and who isn't. But right now, ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all of the radical groups are using these refugees as a Trojan horse to have that as a part of infiltration. There are a large number of them that won't even tell you that they're Syrian or anything else, and there's false identity. We've got individuals being found at airports trying to get in. We've caught several down at the Texas border, and it was a group in Nicaragua. So all of these things are using as a cover. At the same time, we're talking about compassion and all of the things that normally would apply to a true refugee. But this Move On organization, which is funded by George Soros and several others, is a radical group that's been going on for several years with other issues. But I'm looking at the way this thing is starting to unfold and what's happening in various cities around the United States. There was recently an election in a suburb of Detroit, a small city that is now completely, the elected officials are all Muslim. 5 times a day in the streets, the sound calling to prayer and all of these things are going on. And because you are not a Muslim, there's a real attitude about whether you can say this or you can say that, and all this Islamic phobia that's being charged. But what concerns me is the fact that even the professor of Islamic Studies at the University of Kentucky, a Professor Bagby, he's a member of the National Board of the Islamic Organization, and he made a statement that I think illustrates my point. He said that ultimately we Muslims can never be a full citizen of this country because there is no way we can fully commit to the institutions and ideology of this country. And
right.
This is the problem that we've had. And all of these communities that have had large numbers, they become isolated and become no-go zones. The police departments and others won't go. And it's a very frightening thing. And you can see it accelerating into problems that they're facing in Great Britain. The complete communities and others and the radical elements that are increasing. And we're going to be seeing the same thing here. So it's a combination of a lot of things that I find very difficult to get the average person to recognize and see.
Now, here's an article from World Net Daily, and it says Al-Qaeda terror boss caught on immigrant boat.
Right.
So they definitely are getting some terrorists mixed in.
Yeah, it's inevitable.
Immigrants.
It's a perfect opportunity for the radicals to use that cover to infiltrate that they would never be able to do on their own without it.
Yeah, yeah.
And not only that, but you've got a second generation of some of the Islamic people that are sending their young people that are going to the Middle East, to Syria and others for training camps and all that, and coming back to the United States. So
to blow us up.
All those ticking bombs are laying under the surface, and I think we're ultimately going to face a catastrophe that'll make the 9/11 bombing of the towers seem insignificant.
Well, and then you turn right around, and here's Mayor Fischer and Congressman John Yarmuth saying, "Oh, bring them all in, bring in more Muslims, bring in more Muslims." And I was down there.
Right.
I talked with some of the people. I said, "Well, what about this massacre that just occurred in Paris?" "Oh, well, it won't happen here."
Well, that was another example where in the state of not only Paris, but all of France has over 6 million immigrants that have come in. If you remember the time when they were part of Algeria, was a part of France and all of that, and after the war there and the settlement there, all of the immigrants that were coming out of Syria and all that, and they're still hostile about that.
Yeah.
But historically, we've got to go back to the Crusades and all of that, and their hatred. For example, the Pope, the Catholic religion, because they call him the Great Crusader.
Yeah.
Because it was Pope Urban II that created the first that. And it was only that, it was self-defense.
Sure.
And they had been into all the way to Vienna, and that was 328 years ago. And that was when they said, we've got to push back. They're taking over every area of the Christian world, and we have to get them stopped. And it goes all the way back to the Moors that ran all of Spain.
Yes.
Until 1492, and they were repulsed and pushed back into North Africa. We call them the Moors. But all of these different names for various tribes all have the same agenda. At the end of World War I, when the country were all created by the British and the French, and lines were drawn and split families, that was the breakup of the Ottoman Empire. And it was in 1920s, 1919, 1920s, that all of this started. And it's been fermenting ever since. And they're using terrorism as a way to address the problems and frustration that have been boiling over for ages.
Now, here's another article that says 8 ISIS terrorists apprehended at the airport posing as Syrian refugees.
Right. A classic example of how they're operating.
You know, for these people to say, "Oh, if we just had more Muslim refugees in here, we'd be okay." But and I understand we're getting more refugees now than we've had, and I guess since the country began.
Right. And every one of those that have been in the past that have come in, whether they're the Italians, the Irish, or any of the others, have been automatically wanting to assimilate and become Americans.
Yeah.
And it was a ultimate goal because of the reason they came here in the first place.
Right.
Was to assimilate. And they know known immigrants that their children were not allowed to speak the original family language, even though the parents still did. They wanted their children only to know English and become Americans. And that was the critical thing in their life, that make their children part of the American way of life. And this is not happening in the Muslim community.
Here, the Muslims are coming in here more or less to take over,
right, and
to promote their culture and get rid of ours.
I guess I should quote the Holy Quran. There's a section 474 that states, "Let those who fight in the way of Allah, who sell the life of this world for the other, whosoever fighteth in the way of Allah will be slain or be victorious. On him we shall bestow a vast reward." So they have this attitude that it is a holy war, and until they establish a caliphate and everything is all under one ruling thing, and they're getting rid of anybody else. And a classic example is in Iraq, where the Kurds recently have recaptured a village, and they've become in the aftermath of that, and they come in, they find these mass graves. And one, the particular of the Yazidis, another religious group that are non-Muslim, and they've found 11 mass graves that have all been discovered in northern Iraq. And the Human Rights Watch established that the militants killed 3,000 to 5,000 people. And
my goodness, just because they don't agree with them.
Exactly, because they call them the devil worshippers because they don't follow Islam. And that's the same attitude they had about Christians and Jews and any other religion who are infidels and not part of their main. Then they take and capture the women and make them sex slaves. And I think you got a video that will be shown during this program that will show what's happening in Greece and others where they're becoming overrun with these individuals that are so-called refugees.
Here's one more article. This says at least 1/3 of the Middle East refugees lie about being Syrian. And you can tell just from looking at them that they're essentially all men, young men, soldiers, in other words, and almost no women and children. And they are just going in by the thousands.
And 90% of them are coming in between the ages of 18 and 30.
18 and 30. So they're like fighters.
It is not quite on a biblical scale, but an exodus it certainly is.
The other side of this tragedy is how it will change Europe. Non-Western migrants had already been flooding into Europe for decades.
Right. And there are some widows, there are some children, and others, and that's a separate issue if you want to discuss what is compassionate and humanitarian. But the young men should have, if they were that concerned about it, they should have stayed there and joined the Kurds and other groups to fight against the ones that they call the terrorists.
Yeah, exactly. And there are a lot of Islamic countries in the Middle East that could take them. They'd be their own culture, everything, and they would feel right at home. But they have to bring them over here where they're going to try to take over our country.
They'll take over Jordan. They'll take over Saudi Arabia. They'll take over the Emirates and all that. And that's why they don't want them in there for the very same reasons we're discussing. Because they will come in and literally take over the country.
Okay, well, here's another article that says that when the reporters asked Obama about his strategy in dealing with the Muslims and made a reference to the massacre in Paris, well, he flew off the handle and got mad at him for even asking such a question.
And he did it 5 times. There was different reporters asking the same questions, and he was giving the same answer each time. There's an agenda there that I'm not sure that I'm even qualified to even type of his ideology and everything else, but everything has been demonstrated. That his basic hatred, and you can go back to his book, Dreams of My Father, which was basically the hatred of the colonial powers, not only Britain, France,